Hello there, my name is Adam Buzzard, and tonight I'll be sharing with you an adventure. As we journey through this adventure, I'll be taking you in and out of the mountain of Erebor. Legend called it the Lonely Mountain. This story is originated from one of the most legendary writers of our time, J.R.R. Tolkien. Called The Hobbit, The Hobbit is a book full of adventures, but it also has an underlying theme of perseverance. It shows how former foes can work together to defeat a common enemy. It also shows how undertaking different experience allows people to grow in ways they did not think possible. But tonight, however, we have managed to recreate or better summarize the book in the most fun and interesting way possible. In it, we shall be meeting with wizards, hobbits, dwarves, as we travel together into wild places, through treacherous lands swarming with goblins and orcs, deadly trolls and giant spiders, shapeshifters, and even sorcerers. So I will need you to picture yourself ready to embark on an adventure. Then cozy up and get comfortable as we begin our journey to the Lonely Mountain. It began long ago in a land far to the east, the like of which you will not find in the world today. There was a city of Dale, its markets known far and wide, full of bounties of vine and vale, peaceful and prosperous. For this city lay before the doors of the greatest kingdom in Middle-earth, Erebor, stronghold to Thror, king under the mountain, the mightiest of the dwarf lords. Thror ruled with utter surety, never doubting his house would endure, for his line lay secure in the lives of his son and grandson. Ah, my friend, Erebor. Built deep within the mountain itself, the beauty of this fortress city was legend. Its wealth lay in the earth, in precious gems hewn from rock, and in giant seams of gold, running like rivers through stone. The dwarves were known as mighty warriors. They were legendary champs with gold in their teeth, their deep and wondrous beards dark as night, their armor and swords made shiny with silver, and forged by the dwarves themselves, so that every armor, vest, and even boot was just their size. And because of this, they were no match for any kingdom. The skill of the dwarves was without equal, fashioning objects of great beauty out of diamond, emerald, ruby, and sapphire. Ever they delved deeper down into the dark, and that is where they found it. The heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone, a very shiny and rare stone, unique and sparkles more than any treasure held by the dwarves. Thror named it the King's Jewel. He took it as a sign that his right to rule was divine. All would pay homage to him, even the great elven king, Thranduil. But the years of peace and plenty were not to last. Slowly the days turned sour, and the watchful nights closed in. Thror's love of gold had grown too fierce. A sickness had begun to grow within him. It was a sickness of the mind, and where sickness thrives, bad things follow. And there lived a terrible monster by the name of Smaug. It was a dragon who came out of the north, devouring both men and beasts. And this monster was so destructive that he was feared, and unless help came, no living creature would be left on the face of the earth. He had a body like an ox, and legs like a frog, 2 short forelegs and 2 long ones behind. He had a tail like a serpent, 10 fathoms in length. When he moves, he jumps like a frog, flies like an eagle, and roars like a hurricane. And with every spring it covered half a mile off the ground. For this dragon had sworn to wipe out the city of Dale, and vengeance on Erebor. Smaug had to remain for several years in the same place, waiting for the perfect time to attack. And the moment he could sense the sickness that had befallen the king, Smaug decided to strike. The first they heard was a noise like a hurricane coming down from the north. The pines on the mountain creaked and cracked in the hot, dry wind. The young dwarf Prince Thorin called out the guards and ordered the alarm be sounded. Then they knew there was a dragon. The dragon first took the city of Dale, burning down anything or anyone in his path. He was a fire drake from the north, and the city of Dale was destroyed. Such wanton death was dealt that day, for the city of men was nothing to Smaug. His eye was set on another prize, Erebor, for dragons covet gold with a dark and fierce desire. The dwarves gathered in large numbers at the mountain's entrance, in heavy armors led by Thorin, ready to fight back. But a dragon's rage and anger could not be easily held. Smaug attacked Erebor mercilessly, breathing fire everywhere. Great numbers of dwarves lost their lives, while others made a run to save themselves. Thror, the king, took the Arkenstone and made a run with it. But the destruction caused by Smaug was too much, and the mountain was shaken in terror. Thror fell down, and the Arkenstone slipped away from him. Erebor was lost, for a dragon will guard his plunder as long as he lives. The dwarves ran for their lives, shouting and crying. The young dwarf Prince Thorin called out for help to their greatest ally, the elves, who were watching from a distance. But Thranduil, the elvish king, would not risk the lives of his kin against the wrath of a dragon. So no help came from the elves that day, nor any day since. Robbed of their homeland, the dwarves of Erebor wandered the wilderness. With no food, no shelter, the once mighty people brought low. The young dwarf prince took work where he could find it, laboring in the villages of men. But always he remembered the mountain smoke beneath the moon, the trees like torches blazing bright, where he had seen the dragon fire in the sky, and the city turned to ash. And he never forgave, and he never forgot. After the dragon took the lonely mountain, the dwarves were rendered homeless, with no place to go. King Thror tried to reclaim the ancient dwarves' kingdom of Moria, but unfortunately, their greatest enemy had gotten there first. Moria had been taken by legions of orcs. They were beastly-looking creatures that ride hungry and furious Gundabad wargs, led by the most vile of all their race, Azog the Defiler. The giant Gundabad orc had sworn to wipe out the line of dwarves. He began by beheading the king, and then throwing it aside. Thorin watched in horror. Thrain, Thorin's father, was driven mad by grief. He went missing. Taken prisoner or killed, no one knows. They were leaderless. Defeat and death were upon them. That is when the young dwarf prince took the greatest leap of courage for his people, facing down the pale orc. He stood alone against this terrible foe, his armor rent, wielding nothing but an oaken branch as a shield. As Azog was about to deliver a deadly blow, Thorin suddenly used his sword to cut Azog's arm. Azog the Defiler learned that day that the line of dwarves would not be so easily broken. Thorin rallied his army of dwarves, and they continued their battle with the rest of the orcs. Their forces rallied and drove the orcs back. The enemy had been defeated, but the dwarves held no feast nor song that night, for the dwarves that had lost their lives during that battle were beyond the count of grief. Only few had survived, and they thought to themselves then, there is one whom they could follow. There is one who they could call king, Thorin Oakenshield, the young dwarf prince. The few remaining dwarves led by Thorin settled at the kingdom of Moria near the Blue Mountains. There they had shelter and life once again, a life of peace and plenty for many years, while they prepared to take back their long-forgotten home, Erebor. Well, as years passed, a wizard came by their midst to help them reclaim Erebor, a wizard who is none other than the famous Gandalf the Gray, a powerful warrior, very tall in height, with long hairs and deep beard both sparkling white. Anyone could easily tell it's him, because he always wore the same gray pointed hat and loosened tattered clothing. He never goes without his staff, a powerful instrument, which he often used to command nature to do his bidding. Many people only knew him by his ability of making extraordinary fireworks, but to some, he was much more. Although Gandalf is not the only wizard in this adventure, there are about 5 of them, and they are all powerful in their own ways. The greatest of them is Saruman the White, known as the chief of the wizards. Then there are 2 blue wizards, Lord Elrond and Lady Galadriel, who ensure the peace and order against the forces of an evil monster called Sauron. The 5th in the order would be Radagast the Brown, a very great wizard. He's a gentle soul who prefers the company of animals to others. He keeps a watchful eye over the vast frostlands to the east, and good thing too, for always will evil look to find a foothold in this world. So the dwarves, led by Thorin and accompanied by Gandalf, set off for their great quest to reclaim their homeland. But for this mission to be successful, only one person could make it so, a burglar at Bag End by the name of Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins lives a quiet and peaceful life at Bag End, but for quite by chance and the will of a wizard, fate decided he would become a part of this tale, and the dwarves, accompanied by Gandalf, had to travel all the way to Hobbiton to find him. It began in a hole in the ground. There lived a hobbit by the name Bilbo Baggins. Not at all a nasty, wet hole full of dirt, worms, and oozy smells. This was a hobbit hole, and that means good food, a warm hearth, and all the comforts of home. Bilbo lives in a hole because he is a hobbit, one of a race of small, plump people about half the size of humans, with furry toes and a great love of good food and drink. He was such a kind and welcoming fellow. He doesn't approve of being late. In those days, he was always on time. He was entirely respectable, and because of this, nothing unexpected ever happened. Bilbo is quite content at Bag End, near the bustling hobbit village of Hobbiton. But one day, while he was enjoying a pipe at the door outside his front porch, his comfort was shattered by the arrival of an old wizard, Gandalf, with a long cloak and staff. Bilbo recognized him as the wizard, who was creating spectacular fireworks displays on holidays in Hobbiton. But Bilbo still looked on the old wizard with a suspicious eye. "I'm looking for someone to share an adventure with a group of 13 militant dwarves," said Gandalf. "An adventure?" Bilbo asked. "No, I don't imagine anyone west of Bree would have such interest in adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner." Bilbo declines and quickly excuses himself. He invited the wizard to come over for tea sometime, but in reality, he wants nothing to do with Gandalf and his adventures. But before Gandalf left Bilbo's home that morning, he made a mark on Bilbo's door with his mighty staff, a shiny green mark that dazzles like neon during the nighttime. This mark would act as a beacon for some uninvited guests. On that warm and beautiful evening, as Bilbo settled to have his dinner, the doorbell rang. Bilbo assumed it is Gandalf, but to his surprise, a dwarf named Dwalin pushes past him and promptly sits down to eat. Soon, other dwarves began to arrive, and as Bilbo's neat little home gets crowded with dwarves, Bilbo becomes increasingly confused and annoyed. They trace the mark left on Bilbo's door by Gandalf. Gandalf must have told them there will be a great feast at Bilbo's home that evening. At last, Gandalf arrived with his remaining dwarves. The 13 dwarves and the wizard nearly cleaned out Bilbo's pantry. Bilbo was very kind and welcoming, of course, but at the same time, he really wasn't happy because the dwarves' visit was unexpected. The dwarves wined, danced, and ate to their full before finally settling down to discuss their business. It turns out the mark on the door is an advertisement for work as a burglar, and was purposely left there by Gandalf. It soon became clear that Gandalf has volunteered Bilbo to be a burglar for the dwarves on their adventure. The hobbit protested, and the dwarves grumbled that the soft little hobbit does not seem suited to their adventure. He tried to convince the dwarves, especially Thorin Oakenshield, a very important dwarf, that Bilbo is the burglar they're looking for to help them break into the mountain. Well, Gandalf, however, was certain that Bilbo is useful, and insisted that there is more to the hobbit than meets the eye. Then Gandalf brought out a key and a map, and handed it to Thorin. "It was given to me by your father, by Thrain, for safekeeping. It is yours now," said Gandalf. The map points away to a hidden passage in the lower halls of the mountain, and the key opens the door. But they need a burglar to sneak into the mountain and retrieve the lost treasure, the Arkenstone. But Bilbo interrupted. "No, I am not a burglar. I have never stolen anything in my life before." So after a few minutes of loud noise and argument, Bilbo agreed to accept the offer. A dwarf named Balin passed the contract agreement to Bilbo to read and sign. After reading through the agreement, Bilbo denied the offer and went to bed that night. Bilbo woke up rather late the next morning after Gandalf and the dwarves' visit. He was surprised and a little relieved to see that the dwarves had left without him, but they left the contract letter on a wooden chair in the living room. Bilbo saw this letter and immediately changed his mind, and hurried to meet them. Not exactly sure why, or what made him change his mind, but Bilbo hurried out the door without a hat, his handkerchief, or money. He did arrive on time to meet the dwarves, and was offered a pony and a piece of cloak as they embarked on this journey. Gandalf patted Bilbo on the shoulder as they marched down, and said to him, "This journey is not going to be easy, so you will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs, and a good many other things, Bilbo Baggins, before we reach our journey's end. You were born in the rolling hills and little rivers of the Shire, but as we depart from Bag End with nothing ahead of us but the thick belt of jungles and many horrible things, home is now far behind you. The world is ahead." It started out nicely, and Bilbo was able to get along with the dwarves and Gandalf well enough. Bilbo sulks at having to leave without finishing his breakfast, or making proper preparations. As they head east on the main road, it began to rain. By the time dusk approaches, the whole company was tired, hungry, ready to camp, and annoyed at Gandalf's mysterious disappearance earlier in the day, after a little argument he had with Thorin, the team leader. While Fili and Kili, two of the dwarves, were sent to look after the ponies, they discovered two of them were missing. The ponies are 16 in number, but now there are 14, and the two dwarves wondered. As they made their search for the two missing ponies with the help of Bilbo, suddenly they saw what looked like the light of a fire in the distance. They moved closer to investigate, and Bilbo was sent ahead in his first official task as burglar. As he approached a clearing in the woods, Bilbo saw 3 huge trolls sitting around a fire, eating mutton. Bilbo tried to make off with one of the trolls' money purses, and they heard the noise and grabbed him. Trolls will eat just about anything, but they were also short-tempered and dull-witted. As the trolls decided on what to do with Bilbo, the dwarves showed up to rescue him. They fought the trolls for a long time, until they were caught and tied up by the trolls, except Bilbo. The trolls were almost about to cook the dwarves, but Bilbo had to keep them in argument for a long time, until the trolls noticed it was almost dawn. Then Gandalf appeared triumphantly, with his voice that echoed all through the forest. He struck his staff on a big rock which he stood on, and the rock was wrecked in two, letting the sunlight shine on the trolls, which made the trolls turn into stone. Gandalf warned them all to be more careful from now on during their adventure. They found the trolls' cave and a number of well-wrought weapons, which they took as payment for their pains. The going was getting difficult for the dwarves, Bilbo, and Gandalf, as they didn't have enough food, and the terrain they were passing through was dangerous and difficult to navigate. Gandalf was more concerned they would miss the road which leads to the Misty Mountains. They needed to pass through the Misty Mountains in order to reach Smaug and the treasure he had taken from the dwarves. As the company set off the next morning, Gandalf explained that he had checked the road ahead up to the last safe stop along their way. This stop was Rivendell, a city of the elves located just beyond the edge of the wild, near the foothills of the Misty Mountains, which the company would have to pass. As the company approached Rivendell, a number of elves approached them and welcomed them to stay, eat, and rest. During their stay, they met Elrond, the great chief elf, who was as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of the dwarves, and as kind as summer. Elrond helped them to read and interpret Thorin's map, which contained a hidden text written on a midsummer's eve. by the light of a crescent moon nearly 200 years ago. And luckily for the dwarves, that same moon shined that night. Elrond placed the map on a stone slab right under the moon, and the moon's light shone on the map. It revealed the hidden message on the map, while Elrond read and translated. The map described a secret entrance on the Lonely Mountain. Though puzzled by the message, the group regained their strength and was in high spirits as they departed from Rivendell. Everyone was well rested and prepared for the road ahead. Bilbo and company advanced upon the Misty Mountains. Thanks to Elrond and Gandalf's advice, they were able to find a good pass over the mountain range, among many dead-end trails and drop-offs. Still, the climb was long and treacherous. A violent thunderstorm broke suddenly, forcing them to find shelter. Luckily, two of the dwarves, Fili and Kili, found a cave at the side of the mountain where they camped for the night. While they were sleeping, Bilbo had nightmares which woke him up. He was regretting ever having to leave Bag End, where he had no troubles to embark on this deadly mission. So he tried to escape and make his way home, but something unexpected happened. The mountain started shaking, and a big crack-like hole opened in the cave wall. It was a goblin hole, and they all fell into it, trapped and tortured by goblins. The goblins carried the dwarves and the hobbit down into the mountain, to a huge chamber where the great goblin sat. He demanded to know what the travelers are doing in his mountain. Thorin tried to explain about the storm, but one of the goblins brought forth the sword that Thorin took from the trolls, which he was carrying when captured. The sword was called Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver. It's well known among the goblins and is highly feared by the goblins. Because of this, the goblins went into a rage, and the great goblin lunged at Thorin to eat him. Suddenly, the torches lighting the cavern went out, and the great fire in the middle of the chamber shined its sparks onto the goblins. In the darkness and confusion, a great sword flashed and struck down the great goblin. Then a voice guided the captives out of the cavern, a great and majestic voice, which is from none other than Gandalf, who led the dwarves through the passages and deeper into the mountain. The goblins followed quickly after them, but one of the goblins caught up to the dwarf Dori, who had been carrying Bilbo on his back. Bilbo fell off into the dark and struck his head on the ground, rendering him unconscious. Bilbo awoke in a dark tunnel. He was not able to see where to go, or which way to escape to the outside world. As he crawled along the tunnel, his hands felt something cold and metallic. It was a ring, a very powerful ring that can make its wearer appear invisible to others. The ring corrupts anyone who bears it, but Bilbo, not knowing the mysteries behind the ring, put the ring in his pocket and continued on his way down the tunnel. He eventually walked into an underground lake, which he was unwilling to try to cross, because he didn't know how to swim, and he was afraid of the dangers which may live in the water. Then he discovered a tattered-looking creature named Gollum, who was originally called Smeagol. The creature lived on an island in the lake, down into the dark, a wretched little temperamental imp, who would often grumble about, talking to himself, and in concern of what or whom to eat. One could easily count the number of hairs on his head, with very few teeth left on his jaws, and no clothing to cover his skinny bones. He calls himself Precious, and often hunts fishes, goblins, and any other type of meat he could find to eat. He approached Bilbo because he was curious as to what he is and why he is in the tunnel. Bilbo asked the little imp Gollum to show him the way out of the mountain, but Gollum agreed on one condition: to play a game of riddle with Bilbo. Ah, my friend, he loved riddles so much as he loved fishes and goblins. So Bilbo agreed to play with the little imp, and they set the rules. If Gollum's riddle stumps Bilbo, he will eat Bilbo. But if Bilbo's riddle stumps Gollum, Gollum will show Bilbo the way out of the mountain. That was the rule, and Bilbo had no choice but to agree, and they began asking each other riddles. In the end, Bilbo won through a bit of trickery. Referring to the ring he had found, he asked, "What have I got in my pocket?" The answer is the ring, which, unbeknownst to Bilbo, is magical and belongs to Gollum. Gollum, however, does not intend to let his meal get away so easily. His intent was to eat Bilbo instead of keeping his end of the bargain. So he, Gollum, went to his island in the middle of the lake to get his precious, the golden ring that makes its wearer invisible, the very ring that Bilbo had found earlier. Gollum was unable to find the ring, and he suspected the hobbit of stealing it, and ran towards him in rage. Through sheer luck, Bilbo happened to slip the ring onto his finger, and immediately he was invisible, and Gollum ran right past him without seeing him. Bilbo, realizing the ring's power, followed Gollum, who led towards the exit, thinking that Bilbo was ahead of him. When Gollum got near the exit, he stopped because there were goblins crowding around it. Bilbo leapt over him, ran through the goblins unnoticed, thanks to the ring, and just barely managed to squeeze himself through the door into freedom and fresh air. Fleeing from the goblins, and still invisible, Bilbo looked back and realized that he had made it to the other side of the Misty Mountains. The tunnel had taken him all the way through the range. Walking along, he stumbled upon Gandalf and the dwarves, who had just been wondering whether they should leave without him, because they thought they lost their burglar. Bilbo hid himself behind an oak tree so as to get a little of their conversation about him. Then Bilbo finally slipped off the ring and surprised them. The others were astonished by the sudden appearance and wondered how he got past the goblins. He explained how he made his way out of the mountain. He refrained from mentioning his discovery of the magic ring and the role it played in his escape from Gollum and the goblins. Gandalf told them they must move quickly so they can finish walking out of the Misty Mountains before the goblins catch up with them that night. As they walked, they began to hear wolves howling, and soon they were surrounded by wolves called wargs and a pack of orcs. The wargs sometimes work with the goblins to kill and capture humans. Gandalf, along with the dwarves and Bilbo, climbed tall pine trees to escape the wargs. This worked for a little while, but soon they were surrounded by hundreds of wargs. So Gandalf used his staff to send fire raining down upon the wargs, catching some on fire and causing pain to others. The wargs and pale orcs waited at a distance as the fire went away, and the pine trees the dwarves, Gandalf, and Bilbo were climbing on began to fall. They were left at the mercy of the wargs and the orcs. Everything was about to be lost, and Thorin was about to throw himself onto the orcs to fight their leader Azog the Defiler. Azog, whose arm was cut by Thorin in the past during battle, hated the dwarves, and had sworn to wipe them out. He was almost about to kill Thorin until the Lord of the Eagles, who had seen the commotion from his roost high in the mountain, with a number of other eagles, swooped down, picking up the maroon travelers and flying them to safety. The eagles are friends to Gandalf and are enemies of the orcs and goblins. The eagles landed them on a rock called Karok, which led them to a home of someone Gandalf knows. His name was Beorn, a shapeshifter, and sometimes a very deadly beast. Gandalf would not tell them his acquaintance's name, but told them he had a bad temper, he was huge, and he was a skin changer. This means he can change his form from human to animal. He likes to change to a black bear, and he doesn't usually like strangers. Gandalf also explained they must be very polite to him and arrive in twos at his door. The dwarves and Bilbo were very confused and curious about this stranger, so Gandalf took the dwarves to Beorn's house, just located in the middle of the woods outside Mirkwood. Beorn, being an enemy of the goblins and the orcs, offered the company much-needed food and lodging before they make their way through Mirkwood, the last great obstacle before the Lonely Mountain. So in order not to be seen by the goblins while on their way, Beorn recommends that the group take the northern pass, called the Elf Path, through Mirkwood, which would bring them near the Lonely Mountain. This choice would throw the goblins off the company's trail and allow them to bypass the dangerous southern pass. The northern pass is not entirely safer either, so Beorn repeatedly warned them never to stray from the path. Beorn provided the group with food and ponies to carry them to the gate of the path's start. From there, however, they must return the ponies and travel on foot. When they reached the path, Gandalf also departed from them at the gate to Mirkwood to attend some business in the south, wishing his friends the best and reminding them never to stray from the path. Dark things lurk in Mirkwood that even the wizard does not know about. On that note, the dwarves and the hobbit plunged into the forest. The group of adventurers began to walk the path through the forest, Mirkwood. It was a dark, dense forest in which few fragments of light managed to shine through. There is nothing to eat besides the food they carry on their backs, and the water is just as scarce. They felt very alone and depressed from the darkness and unending pathway. It seemed as if they would never leave the forest. They came upon a stream of black water running across the path, but they have been warned by Beorn not to drink or touch the water because it is enchanted. Bilbo spotted a boat on the other side of the water, about 12 feet away from them. It is their only chance to cross the river. Thorin had Fili use a rope with an iron hook to grab the boat and haul it back to their side of the water. It took him a few tries, but he managed to grab it. Then he throws another rope to the other side and anchors it in some branches. This way, they can use the rope to pull the boat back and forth to ferry them to safety. Everything went well until it was Bombur's turn. A deer jumped across the water just as he was boarding the boat, which caused him to fall into the water. He was under the spell of the water, which put him to sleep for days, so he had to be carried by the others in the party. The food had run out, and the dwarves and Bilbo were very hungry. One night, Balin saw some lights in the forest. which made them think that maybe the beings under the lights have food. To go to the lights means they will have to leave the path, which is what Beorn and Gandalf told them never to do. But their hunger won out, and they left the path. As soon as they showed themselves to the elves under the lights went out, leaving them alone in the pitch dark forest. This happens every time they approach the lights. But the last time, Bilbo became separated from the group and was put to sleep by a spider. Giant Spider tried to spin a web around him and keep him for his supper, but Bilbo awoke on time to use his sword to free himself and kill the spider. This act gave Bilbo self-confidence, because he did it all on his own. He eventually found the others, as they were all bound in webs built by giant spiders. He used the ring to help him attack the spiders and free the dwarves. They were very happy to be freed. And again, they were caught up by the wood elves and thrown into a dungeon by the wood elf king, Thranduil. Bilbo was not caught by the elves, because he put on the ring before the others were caught, and appeared invisible to the elves. He stayed, lurking around the castle of the elves, trying to find a way to help his friends escape from the dungeon. Having followed the captured dwarves, walked invisibly through the halls, whispering to the dwarves in their cells and plotting an escape plan. Bilbo discovered that there was a river that ran under the castle, which was used to move barrels of wine and other goods to the castle. The empty barrels were thrown through trapdoors in the king's cellars and floated down the river where the forest river merges with the long lake. This would be a way to free the dwarves not only from the castle, but from the forest also. On that evening, Bilbo was the lucky one. The king's chief guard, after drinking some potent wine, fell asleep. Bilbo was able to steal the keys to the dwarf cells and led them to where the empty barrels were stored. The dwarves were grateful to be freed from their cells, but they were not happy about the thought of floating in a barrel down a river. Bilbo convinced them this was their only chance to escape, so they had to do as he says. He managed to slip through the trapdoor by hanging onto the last barrel as it was thrown down into the water. The barrels flew down the river and out of Mirkwood Forest. Looking to the north, Bilbo could see the Lonely Mountain, the group's ultimate destination. For the time being, however, the river took them towards Lake Town. Lake Town was a human city built on the long lake south of the Lonely Mountain. After the dragon's attack on the city of Dale, the people that lived there fled to Lake Town. This was where they lived ever since. At Lake Town, the barrels were brought to the shore when boats from the town rowed out and cast ropes towards the floaters. And while the men were away, Bilbo freed his companions from the barrels. Everyone had survived, but they were cramped, wet, and hungry. They developed a great respect for Bilbo after he saved them from the giant spiders and helped them escape the dungeons of the elves. Bilbo, too, developed a great respect for himself, having to play a hero all alone. He then had a great deal of courage and hope in himself. Thorin, filled with a new sense of purpose, strode proudly up to the town hall and declared to the master of Lake Town that he, a descendant of the king under the mountain, had returned to claim his inheritance. The people of the town rejoiced. They had all heard the stories of how gold flowed down the mountain when the king under the mountain reigned before Smaug came. They treated the dwarves and even Bilbo like kings. After a fortnight, the company was strong and eager again, though they still had no idea how to deal with the dragon. Thorin felt that they cannot wait any longer, so he obtained boats, horses, and some provisions from the master of Lake Town, and the company set off up the river running towards the Lonely Mountain. The people of Lake Town were quite cautious when it came to confronting a dragon. When the company set off for the mountain, the humans refused to go near it, leaving Bilbo and the dwarves to fend for themselves. Though they were concerned mostly about themselves, the people of Lake Town could not really be blamed for fearing Smaug. They were convinced that he was invincible, and remembering what Smaug did to them in the past at the city of Dale, they wouldn't want such a thing to happen to them again. As they approached the foothills of the Lonely Mountain, the land turned bleak and barren. All greenery and other living foliage had been burnt away by Smaug. When they reached the foot of the mountain, Bilbo and 3 dwarves were sent to investigate the main entrance on the south side. The entrance looked far too dangerous. It was the gate that Smaug used. So the company decided to search out the secret door described on the map, which was on the west side of the mountain. After hours of searching, Bilbo finally located a narrow passageway along the cliff that led to a flat, smooth patch on the mountain side. Though the patch must be the door, the dwarves could not find any way of opening it, as they had forgotten the message that Elrond read from the map. The dwarves banged at the door with picks and axes, but to no avail. They became discouraged and thought it was over. One evening, Bilbo, sitting outside the door, lost in thought, when a thrush landed nearby and began to knock a snail against a stone with its beak. Suddenly, the hobbit remembered the riddle on the map. He quickly gathered the other dwarves by the door, and they watched as the sun slowly set. With the sun's last light, a single ray fell on a part of the door, and there a rock fell away to reveal a keyhole. Thorin quickly took the key that came with the map and placed it in the rock. When he turned it, the door's outlines appeared. Thorin pushed the door until it was fully open. They cried while staring into the depths of the mountain before them. It was decided that Bilbo will enter the tunnel first and find the Arkenstone as the official burglar. Bilbo used his ring to cloak himself invisible and proceeded down the long, dark passage into Smaug's lair. He found his way to the dragon and his treasures. There, he saw the magnificent, terrible dragon asleep, covered with piles of gold. Smaug was red and gold, with fiery breath, sharp claws, and wings as wide as a soccer field. Bilbo was horribly afraid, but he worked up the nerve to do the task. Bilbo continued looking for the Arkenstone, a shiny white stone. He looked down and saw a sea of gold. He walked down quietly through it and started looking through a pile of gold for the Arkenstone. He picked up a large gem and examined if it was the Arkenstone, but it wasn't. He threw it aside. He looked around, seeing nothing but piles and piles of gold. He walked through the mountain of treasure, and he picked up a golden cup. It caused a pile of gold to slide down, which revealed the eye of Smaug as he sleeps under the gold. Bilbo tried to quietly sneak past the sleeping Smaug, but the dragon awoke. Bilbo used the ring to turn himself invisible and watched Smaug as he sniffed and turned to his direction. although the dragon could not see Bilbo because he was still wearing the ring. But Smaug could smell his breath and hear his heartbeat. And behold, the dragon spoke. "Come out into the light, thief. Don't be shy. I can smell your breath. I can hear your heartbeat." Bilbo then removed the ring. Smaug greeted him mockingly. Bilbo was smart while dealing with the dragon. He lavished Smaug with praises and only answered his questions with riddles. These amused the dragon enough to quell his anger for a while Bilbo was indirectly looking for the shiny stone. Cleverly, the hobbit flattered Smaug into displaying his thick-skinned underbelly, revealing an open patch in Smaug's scaly armor above his left breast. While Bilbo and the dragon were still talking, suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he spotted the Arkenstone. Bilbo nodded his head and took another peek at the Arkenstone from the corner of his eye, doing this carefully so as not to make the dragon notice his objective. As the dragon noticed he was working with the dwarves, he brought his head towards Bilbo and opened his mouth. Bilbo used his ring to disappear, made a run towards the Arkenstone, and ran out of there to his dwarf friends. Smaug was filled with rage, unleashing his fire everywhere. The dwarves, with Bilbo, decided to face the dragon themselves. They moved quickly into the mountain. It was quiet. They could not see or hear Smaug. Suddenly, as they moved, a coin dropped, and the sound echoed. Thorin looked back at Bilbo, who then looked up to see Smaug moving above them. The coins stuck to his body were falling down. Thorin signaled them to move, as Smaug was not aware of their presence. As they made their way and entered the western guardroom inside the mountain, they saw decaying corpses of their kin. Thorin wept. They all wept. "No, I will not die like this," said Thorin, the team leader. He turned, facing the company, and added, "We make our way to the forge chamber. There we shall defeat Smaug." As they made their way, suddenly, Smaug came upon them. "Flee, flee, run for your lives. There is nowhere to hide," said the dragon. Ori, Dori, and Bomber quickly ran up behind Smaug. Smaug turned to attack them. As Smaug was distracted by them, suddenly, Dwalin and Nori ran up behind him from another direction. "Hey you, here!" Dwalin shouted. Smaug, getting confused by the trick, now turned to attack them. But Dwalin and Nori made a run for it. Then Smaug noticed Bifur and Gloin running in another direction. He went after them, unleashing fire everywhere. While the dragon was distracted, Balin, Bilbo, and Thorin made it to the forge, filled it up with gold and ready for Smaug. Smaug, still breathing fire everywhere, was brought to the forge chamber. Smaug, not knowing their plans, kept unleashing fire everywhere in the forge chamber, in an attempt to burn the dwarves. But while he was unleashing fire and rage, the gold the dwarves had placed in the chamber began to melt, and Smaug's fire was what they needed to achieve this goal. The golds are fully melted, a hot, boiling chamber of liquid gold. Bilbo played a big risk, making himself chased by the dragon, so as to draw him to a precise location close to the hot chamber of liquid gold. and Smaug was just in the right position as needed. Thorin ordered them to release the anchor and the ropes holding the chamber. The dwarves immediately cut the ropes. The chamber turned upside down, releasing the boiling liquid onto the dragon, taking Smaug down and covering him beneath all the gold. The dragon cried and rose up from beneath the sea of gold, fuming with anger. "Ah, revenge, revenge, I will show you revenge." Smaug burst out of the mountain and flew away towards Lake Town, where he was eventually killed by the people. Smaug, the terrible monster, had been defeated. News of his death spread across the four lands. The dwarves rejoiced at the news of his death, and with the help of Bilbo, they finally secured the Lonely Mountain and its treasures. After the battle, Bilbo and Gandalf returned to Hobbiton, where Bilbo continues to live. He was no longer accepted by respectable Hobbit society, but he does not care. Bilbo now prefers to talk to elves, wizards, and dwarves. He was deeply content to be back among the familiar comforts of home, where he would always wrap himself up at night, snug as a bug in his bunk, with some brewed coffee and ginger tea, after his grand and harrowing adventures.